So, Dean Sikes, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm really happy to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity.
We're going to be talking about your journey and the youth mental health crisis that's happening today. So, the interview is relevant to anybody that might be watching, parents, grandparents, anybody like that. So, you have written so many books, spoken about the crisis, but most recently, you wrote the book You Matter. So, Dean, you are a survivor of sexual abuse
Yep.
and healing. From that, your faith like took control of your life. Can you tell your story to the audience?
No, sure. When I think about this story that I have, I'm reminded that each of us has a story, and all of those stories matter. And for me, I grew up in a Christian home in the southeastern region of the United States. Became a Christian at 7. Remember it vividly. It was a Saturday afternoon. I'd been outside playing football with my best friend Chris Frank, and this pastor came to our home. I excused myself from football, walked into our home, had a conversation, knelt down, prayed a prayer, and Jesus came into my heart. There's no question about that. I knew something had changed. But then I didn't really have relationship with the Lord for a long time. I went to church, and one of the greatest things I get to talk with teenagers about, they come up to me, I go, well, are you saved? They go, well, I go to church. And I go, well, that's wonderful. My car goes to church. It's not saved. Just because you walk into a building doesn't get that check marked off in your box. And so I was just playing the game. I was, Christian schools, Christian friends, church every time the doors were open. And my life took a really downward spiral on a Wednesday afternoon when I was 15 years old at about 3:45 in the afternoon. A friend of mine picked me up from school, went to their home, was getting ready to go to church that night, but this friend of mine had a new electronic gadget that had gotten my attention. Long story short, on that afternoon, I was sexually abused, and 60 seconds changed the trajectory of my life. When it was over, I just was numb. I was numb. Went downstairs, played ping pong, went to church, went home that evening after church, looked in a mirror, and all I saw was someone full of shame and brokenness. And I made a
Mhm.
vow. And the vow, Nancy, was I'll never tell anybody what happened to me. And I pushed down the emotion I was already feeling, which was beginning to go from sadness to anger very fast.
Mhm.
And that vow, I'll never tell anyone, I stuck to it for 22 years. And one of the things I get to share with teenagers, I've ministered and spoken at over 4,300 events now in 8 countries of the world. And everywhere I go, I share this story. And the story is this: if you do not deal with your emotions will deal with you. They do not just magically disappear. And I didn't understand that back then. But at 17 years old, 2 years post abuse, I failed PE. Even though I played quarterback, taught tennis, and played golf, I was plenty athletic. Wasn't changing clothes. And my coach looked at me and says, Dean, what are you doing? I said, no, I'm going into politics. Don't need this. And he said, Dean, if you do not dress out in my class, you'll earn the F and I'll give it to you. And I thought, nah, I was the poster child of arrogance and stupidity. That's a dangerous combination. I thought, no, I'm on the front page of the newspaper. I'm getting all this. I was getting a lot of attention at a young age. And instead of being grateful for it and kind of stewarding it, it all went to my head. And it was just, I was out of control. And I
Mhm.
did fail PE. And where I went to school, our parents had to sign our report cards. That, for many students, is a life changing experience in and of itself. And my dad said, you failed PE. And my drug of choice from 15 to about 22 was lying. I lied more than I ever told the truth. People would say, well, why did you lie so much? Well, the second greatest commandment in the word says to love your neighbor as yourself. I didn't love me. I was incapable then of loving you. I can't teach what I've not been taught. I can't give what I've not been given. And so I literally was living life in this very plastic, non real, very superficial way. And my life was spiraling. I was dating these great looking older girls, and I couldn't figure out why did these older girls want to date me? And I thought, who cares? Sin is fun, I decided, until the
Mhm.
cycles of death that come with it catch up with us. And so, moved forward to 21 years old, had never dealt with it, was in real estate development, had whatever society says makes you successful. I guess we had a little bit of it, and I was miserable. And one day I said a prayer, and the prayer was this: God, it's me. I don't think you're real. I feel stupid talking to the wind. But God, if by chance you are real, if you do hear me, and if you have a plan for my life, prove it. May I just share with your audience, don't ever ask God, the creator of the universe, to prove to you that he's real unless you're ready. 2 weeks come and go, and there was absolutely, without any hesitation of contradiction, zero faith attached to my prayer, the prove it prayer. And but in the goodness of who he is, he answered my prayer 2 weeks later, sitting in my office dialing a phone. It was a beautiful afternoon in March. I'll never forget it. Sun was shining, wind was blowing. I'd been at lunch, dialing this phone. Off behind me to my left, in an office like I'm in now, I heard someone say, "Call mom." And there was so much authority in that voice. I swung around in my chair to see who was behind me. I saw no one, but the hair on the back of my neck knew, "Call mom." And so I did. And I dialed my parents' phone number. The phone rang 6 times, 7 times. On the eighth ring, my mother answered the phone. And when she said hello, instantly I knew something was wrong. Her voice was slurred. She was disoriented. She wasn't sounding like herself. And I was about to learn in that instant when God, who is so real, spoke to me and I heard his audible voice, said, "Call mom." And I did so. My mother was attempting suicide. I bolted out of my office, jumped in my car, drove up Interstate 75. And while I drove, I talked to this God I clearly did not know. You see, I had a religion, not a relationship. Massive difference. And as I was driving, all of these scriptures that I had been taught in church and at home began to come out of my heart and through my lips. Draw near to me, I'll draw near to you. Seek and you'll find. Knock and door will be opened. Ask and you'll receive. And I just said this. I said, "God, I can't save my mom, but you can. Please help." And I drove into my parents' neighborhood, and from the outside in, their home looked fine. It was safe, secure, probably like where you live today. But from the inside out, my mom was dying. I literally speak with millions and millions of people and what I get to do. From the outside in, the audiences appear to have it all together. But from the inside out, so many are in their own private wars, just like I was. That day, I got my mom to a hospital, and as we're driving, she says, "Dean, I can't be dying." I said, "Mom, you're not going to die, but you're going to have to choose to live." The most important word in that sentence is not live, it is choose. Choices create circumstances. Got her to a hospital. A doctor threw me against the wall. They rushed her to the emergency room. 45 minutes later, this doctor walked over to my dad and I. And this doc had the most bewildered look on his face. He had, listen, 4 years of college, 4 years of med school, 2 years of residency, and years of practicing medicine. And this doctor looks at my dad and goes, "I have no medical reason to tell you what I'm getting ready to tell you. It's a, quote, miracle of God. Your wife's fine. You can go see her." I heard miracle of God. I just stood there frozen and went, "You've got to be kidding me. You're real?" And my dad said, "Do you want to go see your mom?" I said, "No, sir, not right now. I'm taking a walk." He said, "Okay." I took a walk, and I could take you to the spot in Park Ridge Hospital in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where I leaned against this long corridor, and I leaned against the wall. And all I can tell you is I had an encounter with Jesus. And from the top of my head to the soles of my feet, the warmest oil-like substance hit me. And I didn't hear an audible voice again, but I heard that still small voice deep inside of me. And he said, "I've called you." I go, "What does that mean?" He goes, "You're going to come work with me." I said, "No, no, that's not my, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going into politics. That's where I'm heading." He said, "No, that's your plan. I've got a different one." And God, Malachi it says, "I am the Lord, I change not." I know what that means very personally. You're not going to talk God out of the calling. The gifts and calling, according to Romans, the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. In other words, what God's called you to do, that's it. And so shortly thereafter, I left real estate development, went to work in ministry. 3.5 years, I served in other ministry all over the world. And on January 1st, 1993, with no money in the bank whatsoever, a little bit of a vision and a portion of faith, I started what would become this whole outreach of reaching teenagers. So that's the short version of the last 33.5 years.
That's amazing. What a story. And when I was reading your book, and this is the book, everyone, it's called You Matter. And Dean has other books on his website too, and we'll talk about that later on. But I there were so many things in there that like were setting off things in my own mind about how, first off, when you were a child growing up, you hated lunchtime because you
Yeah,
knew you were going to get taunted. Now I know there's somebody out there that's probably gone through the same thing. I mean, these are experiences they were horrible. And the
yeah,
things that you went through were horrible. And I'm sorry you went through them, but they actually prepare you for what God has ahead of you. And so that you can actually take into some of your when you're talking to teenagers, you can say, "Hey, listen, you're getting bullied, you're getting taunted, but you know what, God's with you." And I'm sure that that is one of the things that you're speaking into many lives. Is that true?
Absolutely. Here's what I share with people. What you overcome oftentimes becomes your platform, right? And so for me, those 25 or 30 minutes every day, Monday through Friday, going to that lunchroom were the most horrific 25 minutes of my day because, and yet I was very popular. I mean, I was the editor of the school newspaper. I was the president of the pep club. I was stage managing of all the plays. I mean, I was heavily involved. I was in sports. I mean, but yet because when I looked at the mirror, saw the brokenness, there was no way I ever felt good enough.
Hmm.
The irony of all ironies is our entire message and ministry and mission come down to two words: you matter. The thing I never
Hmm.
believed about myself until I got this revelation from God. And so when I see those young people in schools who come up to me afterwards, they go, "Man, you were telling my story." In
Hmm.
the last 24 months, we've had 149 million views of our videos on social media. And every high school I go into, without exception, students come up to me and go, "I watch your videos." And I'm like, "Thank you. Please continue to, because the content we're creating is for you." That's why I wrote the book. I mean, I know my story. I know why I matter now. But this
Hmm.
book, that's what it does. It unpacks the revelation of not only that you matter, but why you matter. Because, Nancy, for me, what I do oftentimes does not get me out of the bed in the morning. Why I do it catapults me out of bed every single morning because I know that there are people who need to know the truth, and truth
Hmm.
is what sets people free.
Hmm.
And the thing about the truth, it's always true.
That's true.
Yeah, it is true. It never changes.
It's always true. So now I'm thinking about also the people that are or like the adults now that have
Yeah,
like you, like me, who have lived through trauma in their life and or made bad decisions and having to deal with that as an adult. And like a lot of people beat themselves up because for the things that they did or didn't do and choices they made and things like that. So can you speak into someone's life about that?
sure, absolutely. Trauma, I've learned, is not only what happened to a person that should have never happened, but conversely, trauma is what did not happen that should have happened. So, like, I was emotionally abandoned by my mom when I was 4.5 years old. She wasn't a bad person. She wasn't a bad mom. She just was incapable of giving something she didn't have.
Mhm.
So I lived the entire majority of my life to that point, all the way. My mom passed away in 2020. So for, however many years, decades, I lived never feeling like I could measure up. And I meet so many adults who say to me, "That's me. That's what, yeah, it's not." And here's what I've realized: broken teenagers become broken adults. And
Mhm.
brokenness attracts brokenness, like health attracts health. And when two people who are broken become one flesh, you know what they do? They recreate brokenness in their offspring, which then becomes generational. And
Mhm.
so, how do we deal with that? How do we allow people who've gone through really traumatic, horrific moments and they've never taken the time to deal with it? And they feel like maybe they've missed their opportunity in life. So let's just talk about it just for a quick second. The greatest example I can give you is Jesus. We see him at birth, we see him at 12, we see him at 30, right? So from birth to 12, at 12, we see him teaching teachers in the church, in church, and his parents are like, "What are you doing?" His response, "Did you not know I must be about my father's what? Business." We see him again 18 years later. What's he doing between birth and 12 and then 12 and 30? He's Luke 2:52, and he's growing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God. He's preparing. At 30, we see him being baptized. Then the next 42 months, he turns the world upside down. My point is this: Jesus prepared 30 years for 3.5 years of work. And literally, we're talking about it thousands of years later. Most people jump in the deep end after 3.5 years, 4 years, whatever, and they spend the next 30, 40 years trying to undo what they've done. My point is simply this: if you and I can get to a place where we truly are healed in our hearts, we know that God has forgiven us for our sins, and we do something very, very critically important. We extend forgiveness to those who have hurt us the most. And I want to talk about this for a second. What happens is we haven't missed our opportunity. We're just prepared. Jesus took 3.5 years to do and the Bible says books. The world could not contain the books that would be written if everything he had done was written down in those short amount of time. So I think the takeaway maybe is you've not missed your opportunity. Maybe like me, we've missed moments, but God is a God of the now. Faith is always now. Now faith is not yesterday faith was or tomorrow faith will be. If we're not in the now of faith, we're in hope. And hope gives faith something to hang on to. And hope is important. My message is a message of hope. but it's
Mhm.
always driving people to a decision. 22 years after I'd been sexually abused, I was married, 3 kids. My wife said, "Will you go to Home Depot?" Well, Nancy, if you knew me, you would fall out of your chair laughing at that question because me and going to a Home Depot, I'm not a fixer-upper guy at all. I don't, it's not me. But I said, "Sure, I'll go." And so I went, took 2 of my kids with me, got to Home Depot, walked down aisle 21, turned right, and I walked right into the person who 22 years earlier had sexually abused me.
Oh,
My life unraveled. Remember, if you don't deal with your emotions, I was on worldwide television reaching 250 million people every night that I would share my story. I could not function because I'd never dealt with my emotions. That night I went home. Lori said to me, she said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Not right now." We put our kids to bed. We went outside on our front porch and I said, "I want to tell you something. I've never had the guts to tell anybody. 22 years ago, I was sexually abused. Tonight, I ran into the person. You're the first person I've ever told." I'll never forget my wife's eyes. She filled with tears, took 2 steps backwards and says, "Sweetheart, everything makes sense. We've got to get you help." I went, "Nope, I don't need help. I've got the Spirit of God. I've got the Word of God. I know what I'm doing here." He says, "If you got a diagnosis of a real serious sickness, would you go to a doctor?" Well, sure. No different. You're going to a counselor. And man, I thought that. And it was pride. I didn't want to go sit down and unpack my life with somebody I didn't know. But I did go. And I'll never forget, I went to a specific counselor and he said, "I can help you, but I don't want to talk about your ministry. I don't want to talk about your books. I don't want to talk about none of that. I want to talk about you. I care about you." And I thought, well, this is different. I said, "What would that look like?" He said, "We would just have a conversation." And I was resistant. And I could hear the still small voice of God saying, "Dina, what are you doing? This gentleman does not need you. You need him. I brought you here. Humble yourself and start talking." And I did. And that conversation lasted 11 years. And it really changed my life. And I tell you all that to simply say this. In the middle of that 11 years, somewhere along the way, I was asked this question: "Will you forgive the person who hurt you when you were 15 years old?" And I said no. Real strong Christian response. They said, "Why?" I said, "It's not fair. I did nothing wrong." To which I was then asked this question: "Was the cross fair?" And I was like, "Well, why'd you have to go there?" It took me about 3 or 4 days, and I went back and I said, I actually went to the Lord and I said, "I'll forgive. Do I have to go to the person?" The Lord said, "No, bring it to the cross." And I did. And I would love to tell you that when I forgave, everything changed, but it didn't. I felt no different whatsoever because feelings are not what drives faith.
Mm.
Faith is driven by the word. So I just kept saying, "Father, I just choose to forgive. I choose to forgive." And I think, and there was a day that I woke up and I knew that I knew that I knew that I was free. Because when we forgive, we get free. And
Yeah.
that's what gave birth to me having the freedom to then write the You Matter book. Because finally I was at a place where my heart was truly healed and I could hear clearly what needed to be heard.
A question butted up in my mind. Can you imagine what the that guy must have been thinking too? I'm sure that he was sitting on a guilt train, with what he had done.
Yeah,
And so facing you was also a part of this as well. So that's even like not that hard that it was hard for him because who knows what was going on in his house, at that point,
right.
before you even showed up, but the guilt that he probably was carrying all his life from the things that he did as a child. I mean, not that we're thinking about that a lot, but
Right.
I
Well,
just kind of had to throw that out there.
the person that abused me could walk into any event that I'm speaking in, could come down to the front row and sit, and I would have nothing in my heart because you truly are free. And again, the reality is there's so many. I see so many teenagers who have been through such immense pain. I mean, immense, just unimaginable trauma. I see them every day that I'm on the road. And here's what I want to say to parents and grandparents, aunts, uncles, teachers, whomever. If a teenager in your life does not feel seen or heard, they will buy the lie that their life does not matter. And every day in America, 5,600 people attempt suicide. Majority of
Wow.
those are teenagers. Pre-COVID, it was 5,240. Just that number alone to give you a visual, in an arena that seats 12,000 people, that same arena would fill up every 2.5 days with teenagers who in the previous 60 hours bought the lie that their life didn't matter. And so
Man.
the whole message behind You Matter is birthed out of Job 33:4. It's 16 words. And it says, the Spirit of God made you, and the breath of the Almighty gives you life. What's the takeaway? God's never made a mistake. He
Mhm.
created you. He put his breath into you. Why? He did so on purpose, with purpose, and for purpose. He did not create you and go, oh, God, Jesus, look what I've just done. I messed up here. No, he created you and went, wow. And I hope my wife, Lori, showed me this a long time ago. She held her hand up like this. She says, Dean, if this is a mirror, do you see what God sees? And I said, you know what? That's a great example. And every day on the road, I'll hold my hand up and I'll just say that. Do you see what God sees? And the vast majority of people don't. They believe the
Mhm.
lie. They see the lie. And here's the $100 billion question to be answered. If a young person today or an adult today is dealing with suicidal thoughts and they're feeling like their life does not matter, what does the enemy of your soul, the devil, know about your life, your potential, your calling, that he's so petrified you're going to get there that he's throwing everything plus the kitchen sink at you to get you to buy the lie? Listen, I told someone just a couple of days ago, the devil, according to the word of God, is a liar and the father of it. He's never told the truth, and he's not going to start with you. I just did a convention at a convention center, Christian convention, just a couple of nights ago, and gave an altar call, an invitation for people who were dealing with suicide, who were dealing with feeling like they weren't enough, who needed to get born again. Hundreds of teenagers came. Hundreds. I was at the altar for almost 2 hours just because there's such a desperate call for people to know that their lives matter.
Wow, the encouragement that you are giving is really, I'm sure somebody is being really, I'm encouraged by what you're saying right now. So I'm so glad you're here, Dean. I need just a couple more questions I have to ask you, but with all the mental health being the new domain of ministry to the
Yep.
next generation, where do you see that going?
Well, Proverbs says in the Living Bible, open communication from its progress. I believe that, I mean, when I talk a lot with parents, they're like, we just don't know what to say to our kids. Well, first of all, let's start here. Stop trying to be their best friend. You don't need to be their best friend. You're their parent. And to the dads out there, I'm going to encourage you to consider this question. Are you a dad or are you a father? There's a massive difference. My understanding is this. Dads give you what you want, but fathers give you what you need. So if God is your heavenly father, they can also be your dad. And so the whole thing of the family unit, spending time together, investing time together. Lori's and all of our kids are adults, married. Two of our kids are married. We got grandkids. So when we all come together, we still, on a consistent basis, will do the high-low game, which Lori just kind of initiated, and we've always done. What was your high today? What was your low today? What made it your high today? What made it your low? The questions are wonderful ways to indoctrinate young people into conversation. Ask. So spending time together, investing time together, asking questions, coming back around. I knew years ago when our kids were teenagers, I knew that we had gone, for me, as the leader of our family, I had really messed up. You know why? I knew we had really relied too much on media and on technology when I was downstairs in our family room texting my son who was upstairs in his bedroom. That day we changed. I said, you know what, that isn't happening. And so I just as early as 2 nights ago, I was at a restaurant and I looked at a couple, looked to be a husband and wife, sitting there across from each other, and both of them were down on their phones the entire time. And I was like, you know what? When you all first got together, started dating, you would have never kept your faces down on a digital device. You would have been engaged. So while technology is wonderful and I'm all for it, we use it every day. This is what I share with people. We count our views. I never count our likes. You know why? If you're still counting your likes, you have no idea how much you're loved. Teenagers get that. So to answer your question a little more intrinsically, I think we have to get to a place where Christian-based counseling is not taboo. It's not a bad thing. It changed my life forever.
Mhm.
Being able to sit with someone, a youth pastor, a teacher, a coach, and say, I'm struggling. That's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of tremendous strength. I
Mhm.
wish I'd had the guts to do it when I was struggling so much.
Yeah.
It's important to keep those lines of communication open.
hmm I like what you said about, when your wife said you need to go see somebody, you need to get counseling, and you're like, no, no, God will help
Yep.
me, God, but really. That's the thing. God said, spoken to your heart and said, "Hey, listen, I sent him there for you."
Yep.
And this is what people have to understand, that sometimes you can't do this alone. You can't
Right.
do it alone. And you know what? There's a lot of people doing a lot of things in life. They don't have time to listen to your story, but you know what? If you go to a counselor, they can hear every bit of it and help you sort it through. That's the beauty of a Christian counselor. And the book You Matter, which is what I'm holding right here. I love it because it's small, and it's got a lot of great pages in it, and it talks about things that can spark some thoughts in your mind, and it tells his story, and it's just amazing. But my last question to you would be, how can we walk with others? How can we walk alongside them while they're struggling?
It's a great question, Nancy. I would simply say this. Sometimes the most honest answer I give people is I don't know. Teenagers, especially, they come up to me, well, why did this happen? Or why did my parents get a divorce? Or why did my grandfather die? Or recently, I was with a young man, and he was a football player, and I was ministering to their football team, and he was like, he waited till everybody kind of walked away, and he just broke down. He said, "You're going to think this is so stupid." I said, "Tell me." He goes, "My dog just died." And he was really having a lot of pain. And I was able to talk to him about my German Shepherds and when one of ours just recently, died and what that was like for us. So I think just being willing to walk along someone's journey, not always having to have the answers, but always being willing to listen. There's a reason I believe that God created us with two eyes, two ears, and one mouth. I think the message is pretty clear. And so, again, I'm a big believer in counseling. I'm a big believer in open communication. I'm a big believer in just being there for other people, standing there, and truly caring, genuinely caring about other people. And if you can't spend an hour with them, can you spend 15 minutes with them? Just
Mhm.
being there, being present matters.
Mhm. I love that. Since 1993, Dean has been on the road ministering words of hope in high schools, teen challenge centers, churches, and prisons across America and in nations of the world, and has spoken at 4,200 places so far. So Dean's sharing the You Matter message with millions of people. You can find out more about Dean Sikes and get his book You Matter at youmatter.us. And for more books and resources that Dean has put out there, deansykes.net. And Dean, what would you like to leave my audience with today?
Yeah, just I would like to simply say this. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and be encouraged that you don't have to have a microphone that you're speaking into, or have cameras on you, or stand in front of thousands of people to be used by God. What you do matters every single day. Keep showing up in the lives of the people that God's assigned you to. Keep having those two open ears and listening, and just understanding how much you matter as an individual. And then if you were not here, we would all be missing someone and something very special. And how I always like to share when I close an event or close an interview is simply saying this, that God loves you. He created you on purpose. And because you're breathing, you matter.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and share. For more Christ-centered conversations, visit the website thecallwithNancySabato.com. Until next time, all glory and honor to King Jesus.